If a food makes me feel horrible, avoiding that food isn't restrictive. It's not punishing your body. It's not a diet. It's just, no, I want to feel great more than I miss that food. So what I wanted to really educate people in the inflammation spectrum is to give people that wisdom and discernment through the system to know what their body loves and what their body hates. At that point, you're beyond the shackles of dieting.
Welcome back to the Essentially You podcast, all about reinventing your health with safer, cheaper, more effective, natural solutions and powerful lifestyle changes so that you become the CEO of your health. I am your host, Dr. Marisa Snyder. Today, we are talking to one of my dearest friends, Dr. Will Cole, about one of the biggest causes of disease today, and that is inflammation. I am thrilled to have Dr. Cole shed light on a subject and talk about why his functional approach is designed to not only support women, but also decrease systemic inflammation for good. Now, it's important to understand that everyone actually needs a little bit of inflammation. It is a healthy immune response designed to defend our body against everything from viruses and bacteria to an injury like a cut. However, for many people, inflammation can rage out of control rather than subsiding when it's done. These people constantly battle a storm of chronic low-grade inflammation that is the underlying commonality in just about every health problem that we see today. Brain fog, depression, anxiety, thyroid problems, autoimmune conditions, digestive issues, cancer, heart disease, and arthritis all exist somewhere on the inflammation spectrum. Now, I know you want to feel good, have energy during the day, and get a good night's sleep, and successfully achieve your ideal weight. But it's important to know that your inflammation levels have got to be balanced in order to get your body back to the way you want to feel. Now, how? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. But before I welcome Dr. Will Cole back to the show, for the second time, I want to take a moment and share with you a special event that is near and dear to my heart. What I'm about to share with you can literally change your life forever. How do I know? Because it did for me after experiencing it firsthand last year. On October 21st, I am launching the second annual Essential Oil Hormone Summit. In response to literally thousands of requests to host the EO Hormone Summit again, I gathered 32 new speakers to speak on hormone topics that you want to hear. And let me tell you, you are going to want to attend this year's event. Why? This is the one place you can learn everything there is to know about how to navigate perimenopause and menopause symptoms naturally, from hot flashes, fatigue, mood swings, and an inability to sleep, and so much more. How to regulate emotions, energy, and brain fog completely chemical-free. Naturally reducing chronic stress and chronic anxiety, both at home and on the go. How to own your menstrual cycle with essential oils and key nutrients. And how to heal your liver, thyroid, and gut with powerful protocols. There's a lot we are going to be covering on this summit, but the number one thing you should know is that this summit has the power to radically change your relationship with your hormones by changing your relationship with the number one thing that throws your hormones out of balance, which is stress. And we talk about that all the time here on the podcast. Now, we already have 25,000 new attendees who are registered this year, and more are joining every single day. I just want you to go out and grab your free access pass by going to drmarisa.com/summit or just simply clicking the link in the show notes for episode 133, and be sure to grab a friend to join with you. Now that you know that this summit is coming down the pike on October 21st, I want to just quickly take a moment and share your wins. One healing rock star is Sandra Farrell, and she shared her big win on Instagram earlier this week. I was so moved by Sandra's story, I needed to share it with you today. Here is what Sandra had to say. Where do I start? So many episodes have spoken straight to me as if they were talking to me. A friend had referred me to Dr. Marisa's podcast after I was telling her about my health struggles. She told me that the podcast would have recommendations, and at the very least, I wouldn't feel like I was crazy after listening to them. Thank you, Dr. Marisa, for validating what I have been going through and not telling me that I'm crazy and that my symptoms are real. Please keep sharing your truth. Well, thank you, Sandra, for sharing your win. I am so happy to shout you out today. And I am so grateful that your symptoms have been validated on the show because your symptoms are real and you deserve root cause solutions. Now, if you're listening, Sandra, I would love to gift you a signed copy of my book, The Essential Oils Hormone Solution, with a personal note from me. Just reach out to me on Instagram at Dr. Marisa and we will get it sent to you ASAP. Now, if you're listening, number one, welcome to this show, especially if this is the first time you're listening in. This podcast is all about empowerment, and if it has helped you in any way, I would absolutely be honored to shout you out as well. You can always reach out to me on Insta, Facebook, or the best way to do it is simply review this podcast on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you love to plug into. That way I can continue to support more women who are ready to become the CEO of their health, along with supporting you too. Now let's dive into this real conversation about inflammation with Dr. Will Cole. But before I do it, I want to sing his praises. Dr. Will Cole is a leading functional medicine practitioner, specializing in clinically investigating underlying factors and customizing health programs for chronic inflammatory conditions, such as thyroid issues, autoimmune, hormonal dysfunction, and more. He consults locally in the Pittsburgh area, as well as via webcam and phone consultations from people around the world. Dr. Cole is a health writer for international publications such as Mind Body Green and lectures nationally. He's also the author of The Ketogenic Diet and The Inflammation Spectrum. Let's welcome into the show. Welcome to the Essentially You podcast, Dr. Will Cole. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, my friend. Thanks for having me back on. I love your show and I'm honored to be back here.
Oh my goodness. I am so happy to have you back there. And can I just take a moment? I know we just saw each other in Arizona about a month ago, but can I take a moment and say, congratulations. I am so impressed. You are kicking out 2 books 1 year after the next. I love the book. And we're going to be talking about the book in great detail. What we're talking about today is the inflammation spectrum. And what's so perfect, this is such perfect timing, Will, because this has been a conversation that we've been having a lot on the podcast. And the minute I saw the book, the minute I saw what you were writing about, I was so thrilled to have you not only come on, but share your brilliance, because this is something that you see every single day in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, being in clinic and seeing patients, and it's obviously my main focus is my patients and seeing the main commonality between so many different health problems and people don't realize it. So I thought that this book would really educate people about inflammation, how it's impacting their lives, and how it exists on a continuum. It's not a static, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And just like so much in functional medicine, we have to tailor our approach to wellness based on where we're at on this inflammation spectrum. So it's definitely born out of my clinical experience. It's actually a concept that I talk about in Ketotarian, my first book. I talk about this concept of the inflammation spectrum as it related to beta hydroxybutyrate, the ketone, and how to go keto the clean way to lower inflammation. But this book allowed me to go on a deeper dive on the inflammation spectrum and kind of educate people where they're at on the inflammation spectrum, and then tools using food as medicine to lower inflammation. But beyond food, everything we do in life is constantly and dynamically either feeding inflammation or fighting it, and teaching people what that is and how they can start taking agency on their wellness to start feeling great and looking great and being their best selves.
Absolutely. I think of even how we eat. We're either fighting inflammation or we're fueling inflammation, even in the way that we eat. And a part of that everyday continuum about the decisions that we make. Before we go into the decisions and what we can do, I know a lot of people, for the most part, understand what inflammation is. I always see this visual of kind of like there being a fire inside, a smoldering fire that we're having to quell. But can you define a little bit for us what inflammation is inside of the body?
Sure. So inflammation is a product of our immune system. It's imbalance. Inflammation is a good thing. It fights viruses and bacteria. It heals our body. It's a good thing. It's your defense mechanism, your immune system's defense mechanism. The problem is, just like anything in the world and in our body, it's all about balance. And it's the Goldilocks principle. Not too high, not too low, but just right. And this applies to inflammation. It applies to our gut microbiome. It applies to the atmosphere, on a global level outside of our body. So much of it is about balance and homeostasis. So inflammation out of check is a problem. It's like a forest fire, like you said, burning in perpetuity. It's this sort of raging fire. And a lot of times, and the problem is, as a nation, as a Western society, there's a epidemic of chronic inflammation. It's sort of this low-grade, insidious forest fire that burns for years and years and years. And when we look at the manifestation of inflammation in the body, it looks different depending on who you are and where it's setting in, where you're seeing the higher inflammation level. So things like autoimmune diseases are inflammatory. Things like musculoskeletal issues like fibromyalgia or tight muscles and joints, that's inflammatory. Digestive problems, inflammatory. Hormonal problems with resistance, hormonal resistance problems like thyroid resistance or estrogen resistance, that is inflammatory on a cellular receptor site level. And then even things that don't even seem inflammatory, like anxiety, depression, brain fog, fatigue, these are all inflammatory in nature. When you look at the scientific literature, they're either full-blown inflammatory issues or autoimmune issues, or they have an inflammatory component. So this is something that is impacting people on a pervasive level. When you talk about the levels of 50 million Americans have an autoimmune condition, it's estimated that 50% of the United States is insulin resistant. That's an inflammatory problem with insulin receptor sites. So this is a problem. And when people start realizing it, they can start waking up to, whoa, this is an issue, and how I feel. There's a reason why I feel the way that I do. But then, as you and I both know, I mean, in such a powerful way, we wield so much power over our physiology by the choices we make. So most of these issues are improvable, manageable, reversible, healable things. So I wanted to really dig into this functional medicine goodness in the book, in the inflammation spectrum, to again empower people. This is a message of health responsibility, but we have to know what we're up against to do something about it. And hopefully this really informs people of these underlying root reasons of why they're struggling with their health issues.
That really lays such a great groundwork in context for what we're actually dealing with. Now, I've got a lot of other questions I want to ask. I know that you talk about inflammation on the spectrum, and that's exactly what this book is about. And most specifically, that it's not acting alone, or it's not inside of a vacuum. So talk to me, how does inflammation, in your terms and what you've seen in your clinical practice, how does it exist on a spectrum, and how does that relate to us, to how we're thinking about our health and wellness?
Mm-hmm. The inflammation in our body does exist on a spectrum. On one end of the inflammation spectrum, it's sort of low grade, things like low grade fatigue and brain fog, maybe some muscle tightness, low grade anxiety. And then on the other end of the inflammation spectrum, it's full blown autoimmune disease, diabetes, hormonal problems. It's diagnosable issues like runaway panic attacks. That's the other end of the inflammation spectrum. And then there's everything in between on this continuum. So what I wanted to do with the book is I put together a quiz that I adapted from the questions that I asked patients over the past decade plus, of really getting to the heart and the core of why people feel the way that they do. So it's called the Inflammation Spectrum Quiz because it's really an original. I should have thought of something a little more fun than that.
No, I think it's perfect. I think it's nice when things are just what they are,
Yeah, it is what it is. That's what it is. The goal of the Inflammation Spectrum Quiz is to tell you where you're at on the inflammation spectrum. Where is it manifesting? Is it in the muscles and joints? Is it in the digestion? Is it in the brain? Is it in the hormones? Is it a polyinflammation component, where something that you and I are very well aware of, that the body is brilliantly interconnected. So inflammation in one area can obviously impact other issues. So this other category of polyinflammation. And then depending on where you're at in the spectrum, there's the sort of linear component to the spectrum, but then there's also sort of the round part of the spectrum where it could be manifesting in different ways. So if you're dealing with hormone problems, you're going to get a hormone toolbox. If you're having neurological issues, you're going to have a brain toolbox, all with different food medicines and lifestyle changes. And as the queen of essential oils knows, I mean, a lot of these things that we do in our life can really help to calm inflammation levels in simple ways and in very effective ways as well.
Well, especially when you're talking about, when we're catching it early, when inflammation may just be a little bit of brain fog, or inflammation just may be a little bit of anxiousness, or where it's not a full-blown diagnosable situation just yet. And that's why I love we can bring in some of those beautiful habits. I'm so grateful that you created a quiz. Is the quiz going to be ready, or is it inside the book?
It is inside the book, but
Okay, cool.
once pre-order, like depending on when people hear this, before the book's out, we're going to put the quiz online. So at drwillcole.com, they can actually take the quiz in the book at drwillcole.com, and they can, even after the book's out. So if you're listening to this after October, you still can be able to take the quiz online. So it really won't matter. You can take the quiz online, or it's in the book as well.
Perfect. Okay, good. So either way, either online or in the book, you guys, this actually is going to be airing. We're doing this a little bit early, but it's going to be airing. Well, I wanted to go out right when the book comes out, so everyone's super excited and ready to go. But I just wanted to make sure if people were like, I want to take that quiz, they know exactly where to get it. So it's one thing to understand what's kind of how inflammation is working in the body. I think the big conversation, and this is where functional medicine really comes into play, and this is what we've been talking about on this podcast, is what triggers inflammation in the body? What is the root cause? I don't know if I told you, but I was diagnosed with a diagnosable inflammatory condition last summer, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And the first question out of my mind is, okay, where is this coming from? Why is the immune system responding the way that it is? We got to get to the root cause of what's going on. And I want more doctors to be asking that question. And that's the question that you've been asking every single day in practice. So talk to me about some of the biggest triggers that you see are playing a role in creating inflammation in the body.
So with inflammation, and we talk about it in the book, but basically it is something is upstream to inflammation, and that's a functional medicine term, but something is triggering the inflammation. But then we know it's this big sort of vicious bidirectional relationship that downstream to inflammation, it'll cause more problems. So the more inflammatory your body is, that can impact other systems of the body, trigger genetic predispositions, and create sort of this vicious cycle of inflammation. But if you're looking at it from one side of that sort of dichotomy here, is that inflammation is downstream to something else. So what is upstream to inflammation? What's actually causing the immune system to overreact? Well, it is a lot of different things. Food is one component of that. Food, just like with inflammation, every food we eat is either feeding inflammation or calming it. There's no Switzerland meal. There's no sort of benign, like I'm doing nothing for your inflammation or your immune system when it comes to
I'm
food.
so sorry. The Switzerland meal just cracks me up so much.
Nothing. There's no neutrality, when it comes to the foods that people pick. And they're going to serve, some are going to feed inflammation in big ways, and some will feed inflammation in slow ways. And then conversely, some will calm inflammation in big ways, and some will just be a little player of calming inflammation. But they're serving one camp or the other. And we're all brilliantly different, with different genetics and different microbiomes and different levels of intestinal permeability. So it definitely is variable from person to person. So the other side of the inflammation spectrum is finding out what your body loves and hates when it comes to foods. And we're all brilliantly different. And that's really the heart of functional medicine, is really finding out what's the best breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snack that you can have for your body. And we're all created differently. So it's really not trying to be overly myopic or have broad sweeping, overgeneralized statements when it comes to food. So through the quiz, the inflammation spectrum quiz, through the toolboxes, you can really start to learn your body language and what your body loves and hates. So food is definitely a part of that. Stress levels, when people are dealing with chronic stress, that can fuel inflammation, impact your hormone and cortisol. And cortisol is an anti-inflammatory, actually. So chronic stress will cause lower cortisol, which people think, well, isn't that a good thing? I thought cortisol was bad. Well, it's just like inflammation in our gut microbiome. It's the Goldilocks principle. We don't want cortisol high, but we also don't want cortisol really low, because that typically is a sign of chronic inflammation, because you don't have the checks and balances, the regulatory system of inflammation in the body. So stress, exposure to toxins, and that's environmental toxins, things like mold, And then I would say chronic infections is another part of chronic viral infections, bacterial overgrowth, gut-centric inflammation can definitely be an issue. A lack of sleep can raise inflammation, a lack of activity, so people being lethargic. Things like the activities that we do in our life with too much technology. Technology is fantastic. It's how we're connecting right now with all the wonderful people out there. But we have to have balance in our life. And what is balance for your body? And that's what the question that I'm asking in the inflammation spectrum is. We need to find sustainability in our life to live a long, healthy, vibrant, enjoyable life. And it's all these things that we have to take inventory of to really achieve those wellness goals.
I agree. Absolutely. So, and I think about this, and I know when I start to unpeel the layer of inflammation and what causes inflammation and what triggers inflammation, it can feel a little bit complicated. I bet people are always wondering, well, where do I even start? How do I even begin to unpack and figure out what are my triggers, whether it's food or it's stress, or maybe it is a hidden infection, or it's trauma, or it's gut issues that I'm dealing with. How do we begin to, well, first question, how do we even know we're dealing with inflammation? Because, I pretty much think that almost every patient I've ever worked with has inflammation at some level inside of the body. So I could say it's almost safe to say that we're all dealing with some type of inflammation, living in the world that we're living the life that we're living. But how do we know for sure? And then, and this is the kind of the $1 million question, and so I'm so grateful that you've written this book, where do we start?
Taking the quiz, whether on at drwillcole.com or the book, is a good way to start to kind of see how you're feeling. And there are surprisingly people that score lower on the quiz and they feel relatively fine. And you're right, they're probably dealing with some low grade issues, but they're on one mild end of the inflammation spectrum. I think obviously the people that we're talking to are people that are looking to move back lower on the inflammation spectrum quiz. They've had their wake up call. They realize, hey, this is not how I want to feel, and they want to feel good again. So I think we may be surrounded by people that are noticing it more and are starting to move in the better direction, which they absolutely can do, and giving them the tools to do so. So how you can either kind of take inventory of your symptoms, like how are your energy levels? How's your sleep? How's your muscle tightness? Are you having digestive issues? How's your brain function? Are you having trouble with word recall, memory recall, anxiety, depression, other inflammatory symptoms that you may not even think about as inflammatory will start to be uncovered when you start looking at all the systems of the body. So that's one way to do it from a subjective standpoint and being as objective as you can be. And then obviously labs are a great way to do it. So we talk about it in the book, but basically the inflammation spectrum labs are just labs that you can get pretty low cost. And most of these labs, you don't need a functional medicine doctor for. Obviously, we can decode them, I believe, better, and we can run more expansive labs. But a lot of these things are just simple labs that are very accessible. So things like a high sensitivity C-reactive protein, it's an inflammatory protein. In functional medicine, the optimal goal would be under 1. And homocysteine is an inflammatory protein. We want it under 7. Ferritin is a biomarker for stored iron. And it's the Goldilocks principle of ferritin. We don't want it too low. That could be a sign of iron deficiency anemia, but we don't want it too high either. So if you start seeing higher levels of it, above 250, it can be a sign of inflammation. It's an acute phase reactant. So in states of inflammation, this ferritin can spike. And then there are some deeper labs too. You can look at calprotectin and lactoferrin. These are gut biomarkers that we look at on microbiome, gut health labs that can be a sign of gut-centric inflammation. And then we look at some genetic SNPs that can make people genetically more prone to these inflammation spectrum issues, like the MTHFR gene SNP. These are gene variants that we're all born with, and you can have 1 SNP or 2 SNP, a heterozygous or homozygous gene SNP at this gene called the MTHFR gene, which I know most of your listeners are super savvy, so they'll know about this, but basically it's the gene that makes the enzyme that converts folic acid into folate, which is a methyl donor, which helps for healthy hormones and detox pathways, healthy gut health, and lower inflammation levels as a product of that. People with 2 gene SNPs of the MTHFR are more likely to have these inflammation spectrum issues. And then we look at different endocannabinoid gene SNPs too, which the endocannabinoid system really runs a lot of different systems in the body that in large part, if it's not working well, you're more prone to these food sensitivities and reactivities that many people find themselves with on the inflammation spectrum. So there's the genetic component, which is by all accounts about a third of the puzzle. And then two-thirds of it is epigenetic. So it's looking at gut health. It's looking at where your hormones are at, looking at your inflammation levels. All of this stuff together really is the piece of the puzzle of to getting that lab objective baseline. So you can get the labs run if you want to say, okay, here's my starting point. This is like as definitively as we can know from a lab standpoint. Where am I at on my inflammation levels? But you don't have to. I don't want to feel like people have to like get all clinical if they don't want to. They may just want to take the quiz, see how they feel, and then retake the quiz when they start making positive changes. And I guess that's the second part of your question. What do you do? I would say if you want to keep it super simple, start with food. Food wields a lot of power over our physiology. And the overwhelming majority of people that are listening and overwhelming majority of people going through chronic health problems, food is primary. And then from there, you can use the toolboxes in the book and you bring some different natural medicines in. But you and I both know you can't supplement your way out of a poor diet. You have to start with food first. Then toolboxes are sort of the next level if you want to dig in a little bit deeper from there. And then there's a lot of non-food stuff that we talk about in the book that I have seen over the years from a clinical standpoint that you can deal with food, which is huge for a lot of people, but it's not everything. It's not everything. So you have to look at your stress levels. You have to look at your exposure to things. You have to look at these other things that are a little bit more nefarious in the sense of they aren't as obvious as like that junk food meal, but we oftentimes find ourselves having maybe an unhealthy relationship with technology and we're always scrolling on the phone. And that's creating an epidemic of stress hormones and circadian rhythm. It's impacting sleep levels and that's throwing off inflammation levels too. So to keep it simple, I would say start off what you can handle and then lean into it from there. We make it fun. We make it accessible. This is not something that you have to be a biohacker and like super like a health nerd to get all this stuff done right. I mean, all of my patients are just normal working class people that just have a heart and a desire to feel great. That's the only prerequisite that I would say you need.
I think you're absolutely right. And that is definitely that prerequisite of just wanting to show up for your body, wanting to take care of your body. And what I love so much about you, and I've always resonated with your message, is that simplicity, right? You don't have to become Dave Asprey or a biohacker to really dial into what's going on with your body. And I love that the first step, that foundational step, is really about nutrition. However, that there are a lot of other things that are having an impact on our physiology that we should be mindful of, whether we're using toxic chemicals or we have toxic relationships or we have an addiction to our phones or our iPads or whatever that may be, being really mindful about those types of things as well and making those small changes over time. And from what I understand and what I've learned in just working with my audience and my readers, that food really does move the needle, and having those self-care rituals and practices are massive. I love, love, love this. And what I'm so excited about is, and I've been diving into the book, but literally looking at those toolboxes to kind of figure out like how people can unpack, okay, if I'm really struggling with word recall, how do I unpack this? Or if I'm struggling with anxiousness and depression, what can I do to unpack that? So I love that you've really looked at some of the biggest areas where people every single day are struggling. And here's this little package, this little thing that you can start to do, all these little wonderful habits that for this particular issue is going to help. But what you and I know together is that by doing those things, it's going to have a profound impact on other parts of the body as well.
So much so. And yeah, I really wanted to create a system that translated from a system to really life ownership and wellness ownership. I see that same catalyst happening with my patients and like that amazing, like it's so rewarding to see them do this thing, well, quote unquote, functional medicine at the beginning. And then they own it for themselves because what the goal is and what I wanted to really get into the book was how can you find out what your body loves and how can you find out what your body doesn't love? Because that is clarity, that is body wisdom, that is freedom. Freedom to know. I mean, if food makes me feel horrible, avoiding that food isn't restrictive. It's not punishing your body. It's not a diet. It's just, no, I want to feel great more than I miss that food. So, what I wanted to really educate people in the inflammation spectrum is to give people that wisdom and discernment through the system to know what their body loves and what their body hates. At that point, you're beyond the shackles of dieting. You've now live in grace and lightness. It should be the ethos of wellness. And I think that you have to kind of put the work and the intention to get there. But the other side of it is grace and lightness for your wellness.
I agree. Well, and the thing is that we're intentionally, whether we like it or not, so every part of our life, every aspect of our life is a ritual or a habit, however you want to call it. You're making decisions about what you're eating. You're making decisions about taking that phone call or scheduling your life or whatever that may be. And it's really just swapping out whatever those habits are for habits that are more nourishing to your body. And I think the more that we attune into our body, just like you're saying, Will, and we listen to what our body needs, we can begin to make those really nourishing habits. And in turn, it does create downstream, it's really helping to support our body overall.
Definitely. And it's such a simple thing. So many people don't realize it. And maybe the super health savvy people that listen to your show know more than most people, which I know that is the case. But they all have family and friends and loved ones that don't get this. So it's really a powerful message that we're talking about in this space of wellness, in this day and age, at this moment in time. It's so powerful because we look at the levels of chronic diseases and it's growing like never before. And the amount of money that we're spending on chronic disease, it's horrible. But the dichotomy of that is people are waking up and realizing we have to do something different to see something different. And the way that we're doing it as a mass, culturally, is unsustainable on so many levels. So I'm really excited that we're having this conversation because I know the power and life-giving information that what functional medicine has to bring can really bring in someone's life.
Well, and especially this book, I just want to take a moment and honor you for I don't know, what would you say, over a decade that went into this book?
I'm getting old.
Oh my goodness, you're so funny. But the amount of experience, the thousands of patients that you had to see to really gather this information, the research. I mean, I know what goes into writing a book like this. And what I love so much more than anything, and why I was so happy to highlight you, is that idea of ease and grace, that even though we're dealing with something kind of colossal at this moment, it doesn't have to feel so colossal. It can be as simple. And so what I want to tell, if you guys are listening, I know you are, please, I want you to grab the book, and I will have all the links in the show notes. It's called The Inflammation Spectrum. You're going to see it on my social. You're going to see me blowing it up all over the place because I love Dr. Will Cole. Anywhere else that you want us to come and check out? I know that we'll connect to the quiz. Anywhere else we can come and find you?
All the information's at drwillcole.com. If people want to learn more about those labs that we talked about, we do run those for people around the world. But on social media, it's at Dr. Will Cole. That's DrWillCole on Instagram. You can write that in on Facebook and Twitter and all the things. And I'm there. And I'm excited to connect with people, and I'm excited for people to check out the book.
Absolutely. Me too. I am so excited. This book is a wealth of information, but it's a wealth of information that is disseminated in a way that is just so easy to implement, because I know how scary inflammation can feel. And Dr. Will, you do such a magical job of making it not so scary.
No, thanks so much. I don't want to scare people, but I want to empower people.
I hear that. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited to highlight you, and I can't wait to see you soon.
Likewise. Thank you.
There is no question that inflammation has become a serious health problem. Today, someone has a heart attack every 34 seconds, and every 60 seconds, someone in the United States dies from a heart attack or stroke. A staggering 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will get cancer in their lifetimes. Autoimmune disease are now the 3rd leading cause of death and disease in the world. And guess what all of these diseases have in common? It's inflammation. But you know what's super amazing? Food is a powerful inflammatory fighter. Let's be honest, it is foundational. And food is something that we love to do every day, right? We love to eat. And it's so incredible to know that it can calm inflammation and the inflammatory storm happening in the body. Now, every food that you eat either feeds or helps to extinguish inflammation. So making good choices are always going to pay off. but those choices have got to be made at every single meal, every single day. Now, this is why I recommend Dr. Will Cole's new book, The Inflammation Spectrum. And it's currently available for pre-sale, which I highly recommend you going and getting. It's going to be in the profile link, so head on over for episode number 133, or you can just head straight over to Amazon and grab it there. I want to say thank you so much for stopping by and listening in to the Essentially You podcast. Our next episode is exploring what if your thyroid is not actually the root cause problem? Well, let me tell you, it wasn't my root cause problem. There were other root causes driving thyroid dysfunction for me. Now, I'm bringing on one of my besties, Bridget Danner, and Bridget Danner is also a speaker on the Essential Oil Hormone Summit. And if you love her interview coming up on the podcast, which believe me, I'll tell you what, I know you will. You are going to love the summit interview as well. So be sure to get your free access pass to the EO Hormone Summit. The link will be in the show notes for episode 133. Until then, have an amazing day.